Hello, everyone. Today I'll be presenting on learning and memory based on our textbook, Psychology of Behavior. These two processes, memory and learning, are the foundation of how we do things like adapt and grow and function in our daily lives. We often think of them as abstract ideas, but honestly, they're very deeply rooted in our own biology, like our brain biology. And my goal today is to walk you through how learning and memory not only work, but the brain structures involved and really why they matter for behavior and even recovery. Okay, so let's start with learning. In psychology, learning is defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior due to things like experience. It's not just memorizing, like, let's say, like facts for a test. It's any process in which our brain adapts to new information. Uh, what's a good example? For example, like when you were a child, like when I was a child, um, there was this lamp in my grandpa's house and it was very, very hot. It was very hot. And my mom always told me like to not touch it. And obviously, as a child, you're going to do it anyway because you want to see for yourself. So, an example would be me touching that very hot lamp and it hurting. That experience would create a lasting change in my behavior. So I learned from my mistake. I learned, okay, that lamp is hot. We don't touch that because that hurts. Learning happens in different forms, um, like classical conditioning, operant conditioning. Um, I can't really think of any more, but yeah, like those. Each of those have they all I don't know in a way they all have distinct brain operations, but they all share the same common idea, if that makes sense. Let's get into memory. Memory is the process of gaining information, storing and retrieving it. If you want to think about it, the way I think about memory is I think of it as like a filing cabinet. A filing cabinet. Um, Obviously, it's a lot more dynamic than a filing cabinet, but the way you store and retrieve information whenever you need it, it's like a filing cabinet. There are three main stages of memory. There's encoding, which is how we take in information. There's storage, which is what it says. Excuse me. How that memory is stored over time, and then retrieval, which is how we get it when we need it, how we bring it back whenever we do need that memory. Um, let's see. Memory can also be short term, um, which is like It's not like you don't hold that for as long as long-term memory. Long-term memory is what we call explicit memory. Things like facts and events, and also implicit memory, which is like things like certain skills. We went over the types of learning. All right, so let's get into the brain. As far as the brain and learning, learning doesn't happen in one single part of the brain. Think of it as a team effort. Your brain does so many different things, and so many things happen in different parts of your brain. The amygdala, for example, plays a big role in emotional learning, um, like fear. Scary experiences that happen to you, your amygdala is part of the reason why they are so prominent or why they stick to you so much, if that makes sense. um, let's see. Your cerebellum, your cerebellum is responsible for like motor skills and habitual learning. And then your prefrontal cortex is very deeply involved in things like how you make your decisions and um, how you use the information that you have learned. When we talk about the brain and memory, for memory, the most prominent structure in the brain is your hippocampus. And I've also attached a picture of the brain so you can see the different parts that I'm talking about as I'm talking about them. But the hippocampus, it's a region in your temporal lobe, and it is very critical for forming new long-term memories. Um, Without it, people can't form. It's very hard for people to form explicit memories. Explicit memories are like what we talked about, facts and events and things like that. So your older memories and your motor skills will remain, but those explicit memories that we just talked about, people can't form those. The hippocampus also works closely with other surrounding structures of the brain to help organize and retrieve your memories. The cerebellum also um, stores skills like riding your bike or knowing how to swim, things like that. So I say all that to say memory is, like I said, in your brain, it's a team group effort. Mm-mm-mm. All right. Um, I think one of the more interesting parts of the chapter that I was reading was about the synaptic plasticity or neuroplasticity. It's the brain's ability to change, adapt, things like that. Um, it's also like your core mechanisms behind like learning and memory. Um, when we learn something new, our neurons they rewire. So like their connections, the synapses, the synapses, they become either stronger or weaker depending on how often you use them or how often they're rewiring, if that makes sense. All right. Now, into the types of memory. Obviously, we have short term memory, which is like it's very limited capacity and temporary. And then we also have long term memory, which is higher capacity, and you keep those memories for way longer. Um, the parts of the brain that rely heavily or that your long and short term memory rely heavily on are your hippocampus and your cortex. Um, what was gonna say about memory? Yeah, yeah. Long and short term memory, mainly in your hippocampus and cortex. Um, your there's also declarative and non-declarative memory, which declarative memory is like the facts and events and like if I was studying for an exam, that's the kind of memory that I would want to bring up or recall. Non-declarative memory includes things like skills and habits. Like I said earlier, riding a bike, you don't really need to consciously be aware of it. It's just something that you just do, that you know how to do, if that makes sense. Let's get into disorders of memory. Some of the disorders, there's amnesia, which is memory. It's like loss of memory due to brain injury or brain, not injury, but damage, like damage. And then there's anterograde, which is when you can't form new memories, and there's retrograde, which you have loss of past memory. So like you can't remember who people are or like when things happened. And then anterograde is like more short term, like things that have just happened you don't remember or you can't recall. Um, all right. Let's go into some applications. So, sorry, my screen is acting up. Okay, there we go. Explains why practice and repetition are very powerful in things like school and sports, things that we do over and over again, and how our brain, and like I said before, those synapses rewire and reform to remember things or learn new habits, um, how we study for exams, how we learn new sports, and things like that. And it also shows why sleep is very, very critical. Memory consolidation happens during deep sleep, like REM sleep, when you're very, very knocked out, if that makes sense. Right. And to conclude, learning and memory are built on changes in the brain's wiring. Without them, we really couldn't adapt and grow. Learning is how we acquire new information, while memory is how we store it and use it. But both rely on very complex systems and structures and networks in the brain, like we mentioned before, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. And understanding these processes not only helps us succeed in school and in work, but it opens doors for people that have the disorders that we talked about and struggle with the things, the brain injuries and the dementia and the mental health and the amnesia and things of that nature. And my reference page. And thank you very, very much for listening. I hope this gave you a clear picture of how learning and memory work both in daily life and in the brain itself. Thank you for watching.